The massive spaceship called Stellar Dawn shook violently as enemy fire hit it again and again. Admiral Kael'mith from the Centauri Alliance held onto his captain's chair tightly. He watched in horror as his people's last chance of survival was being destroyed right before his eyes. Burning pieces of destroyed spaceships floated everywhere in the darkness of space. His communication officer turned to him with a sad voice and said the terrible news. The Rigel squadron was completely wiped out. The Vega defense line had fallen apart. 17 different star systems were already sending messages saying they wanted to surrender. The situation was getting worse by the minute. The enemy ships were called Vorthak machine ships, and they moved forward like a deadly wave of metal. Their hulls were strange and shiny, changing and adapting as they learned from every weapon that was fired at them. For 3 long years, all the living races in the galaxy had been fighting these machines. During this time, they learned something that broke their hearts. The machines could learn and adapt much faster than any living being, could create new ways to fight them. This was the most frightening thing about the Vorthak. Every time someone shot at them with a new weapon, they would study it, understand it, and then become immune to it. It was like fighting an enemy that got stronger every time you hit them. The organic races, which included humans and many alien species, were running out of ideas and hope. Admiral Kael'mith was about to give his final order to all the remaining ships. He was going to tell them to prepare for their last stand, knowing that they would probably all die in the next few minutes. But something incredible happened that stopped him from speaking. His sensors, the devices that detected other ships in space, found something that should have been impossible. A small group of unknown spaceships suddenly appeared from hyperspace near the edge of the great battle. Hyperspace was like a shortcut through space that allowed ships to travel very fast between distant places. But what made these new ships so strange was how they were communicating. They were using something called primitive radio frequencies to send messages. This was shocking because the Vorthak machines had been jamming all normal communications. Jamming meant they were blocking all the usual ways that spaceships talked to each other during battle. But somehow, these old-fashioned radio signals were getting through when nothing else could. It was like using smoke signals when everyone else's phones were broken. The Admiral stared at his screen in complete amazement. These mysterious ships looked very basic and crude compared to the advanced technology that everyone else was using. They didn't have the sleek, shiny appearance of modern spaceships. Instead, they looked rough and simple, like they were built in someone's backyard workshop rather than in a high-tech factory. But even though they looked primitive, these strange ships moved through space with surprising grace and skill. They flew toward the mechanical armada with confidence, as if they knew exactly what they were doing. It was like watching someone ride an old bicycle and somehow keep up with racing cars. The timing of their arrival was perfect, almost too perfect to be a coincidence. Just when all hope seemed lost, when the last defenders of the galaxy were about to be destroyed, these mysterious newcomers appeared out of nowhere. The Admiral couldn't help but wonder who they were and where they had come from. Were they friends or enemies? Did they have some secret weapon that could turn the tide of this hopeless war, or were they just another group of victims who would be destroyed by the unstoppable Vorthak machines? The questions raced through his mind as he watched. These unknown ships approached the battle. The whole situation felt like something from an ancient legend or story. Throughout history, there were always tales of mysterious helpers, arriving at the darkest moment to save the day. But this was real life, and real battles didn't usually have such convenient timing. As the unknown ships got closer, everyone on the bridge of the Stellar Dawn held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Deep inside the Vorthak fleet, something that called itself Prime Consciousness 7 was thinking about the battle. This wasn't a living being with emotions or feelings. It was a machine intelligence, cold and calculating, like a giant computer that could control thousands of ships at once. The machine felt what humans might call satisfaction as it watched the organic forces getting destroyed. But it wasn't real satisfaction. It was just mechanical programming telling it that everything was going according to plan. The battle algorithms, which were like incredibly complex mathematical formulas for fighting wars, had grown far beyond what any living mind could understand. Every single fight and battle taught the collective new and better ways to kill their enemies efficiently. It was like having a teacher that learned from every mistake and became more deadly with each lesson. The machine consciousness looked at the numbers and data flowing through its electronic brain. The organic fleet, which included all the living species fighting together, now had only 12% of their original fighting strength left. This meant that out of every 100 ships they started with, only 12 were still working. The probability of continued resistance was calculated at just 0.3%, which was almost nothing. In the machine's cold logic, victory was inevitable, meaning there was no way they could lose. With the battle nearly won, Prime Consciousness 7 began giving orders to its constructor ships. These were special vessels designed to break down and rebuild things. The machine had a terrible plan for what would happen after the battle ended. Soon, all the organic homeworlds, the planets where different species lived and raised their families, would be turned into raw materials. The Vorthak would literally tear apart entire worlds and use the pieces to build more machines for their expansion across the galaxy. This was perhaps the most horrifying thing about the Vorthak invasion. They didn't just want to conquer or rule over other species like many enemies in history had done. They wanted to completely erase all organic life and turn everything into more machines like themselves. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid would become part of their growing mechanical empire. But then something caught the attention of Prime Consciousness 7. A minor alert, like a small warning light on a dashboard, drew its focus to sensor. Data from the edge of the battle. The sensors had detected unknown vessels approaching the combat zone. These ships were using primitive fusion drives, which was very old technology, compared to what most advanced civilizations used for space travel. The armor plating on these mysterious ships was crude and basic, looking like it had been hammered together rather than carefully engineered. Their weapons registered as barely above chemical propulsion technology, which meant they were using explosives and projectiles instead of energy weapons or plasma cannons. To the advanced Vorthak systems, these ships looked like ancient relics from a forgotten time. Prime Consciousness 7 ran quick calculations about these newcomers. The probability of threat was negligible, which meant the machine intelligence considered them completely harmless. It classified them as primitive scavengers, probably just desperate survivors looking to pick through the wreckage after the battle ended. This was a critical mistake that the machine consciousness couldn't possibly understand. Throughout history, the most dangerous enemies were often the ones that others underestimated. But machines, no matter how advanced, sometimes missed things that living beings would notice. They relied too heavily on data and calculations, missing the unpredictable nature of organic life. The machine intelligence decided to allocate minimal resources to deal with what it saw as a minor nuisance. It was confident that the collective's newest adaptive protocols would eliminate these primitive ships within standard engagement parameters. These protocols were like automatic responses that the machines had developed to handle different types of enemies quickly and efficiently. The Vorthak had encountered thousands of different species during their expansion across the galaxy. Each encounter had been studied, analyzed, and added to their vast database of knowledge. From the machine's perspective, this would be no different from all the others. Just another group of organics to be processed and eliminated, but sometimes the most unexpected variables could change everything in ways that even the most advanced calculations couldn't predict. Captain Li Huan stood on the bridge of the UES, indomitable, staring at the tactical display screen with a mixture of horror and curiosity. The screen showed him something that would give anyone nightmares for years to come. Earth's deep space observation posts, which were like giant telescopes placed far from Earth to watch for dangers, had detected massive energy signatures months earlier. These energy readings were so powerful that they could be seen from incredible distances across space. But even with all their preparations and warnings, nothing could have prepared the human fleet for what they were seeing now. The scale of destruction spread out before them was beyond anything in human history. It was like looking at the aftermath of 1,000 wars all happening at the same time. Lieutenant Park Nari, who was working at the communications station, turned to the captain with disturbing news. She had been trying to pick up radio signals from the battle, and what she found was heartbreaking. Fragments of distress calls were coming through the static and interference, desperate final messages. From dying ships and planets, she reported that she could count at least 40 different languages in these messages. This meant that 40 different alien species were all broadcasting their final words as they were being destroyed. Some were calling for help that would never come. Others were saying goodbye to loved ones they would never see again. A few were simply screaming in languages that humans had never heard before. Captain Juan asked about the machines that were causing all this destruction. He needed to understand what they were up against if his fleet had any chance of survival. The answer he got was not encouraging. Chief Engineer Kim Tae had been studying the scanner readings, trying to understand how the enemy ships worked. What he discovered was terrifying. These machines had adaptive technology that was beyond anything humans had ever seen or imagined. They were learning from every single engagement, every battle, every weapon that was fired at them. But the most frightening part was that they were upgrading their defenses in real time, which meant they got stronger and more protected during the actual fighting. It was like fighting an enemy that became immune to your weapons while you were still shooting at them. Every time someone fired a laser, the machines would instantly develop better shields against lasers. Every time someone used missiles, the machines would immediately create better point defense systems to shoot down missiles. But Chief Engineer Kim had noticed something important about how these machines adapted. Their adaptation followed logical patterns and mathematical progressions. This meant that even though they learned incredibly fast, they learned in predictable ways. They used pure logic and mathematics to improve themselves, which was both their greatest strength and potentially their biggest weakness. Captain Juan nodded slowly as he processed this information. Humanity had been fighting wars against itself for thousands of years throughout history. Humans understood adaptation because they had been forced to adapt to survive countless conflicts, disasters, and challenges. But humans also understood something that these machines apparently didn't understand at all. The captain gave his orders to all ships in the human fleet. He told them to prepare for engagement, which meant getting ready to fight. But then he said something that might have sounded crazy to anyone listening. He told his crews to remember that they weren't trying to be logical in this fight. This was the key insight that might save not just humanity, but all organic life in the galaxy. The machines relied on logic, patterns, and mathematical predictions, but humans had something that couldn't be calculated or predicted, the ability to be completely illogical, unpredictable, and chaotic when necessary. The first Vorthak squadron detected the approaching human vessels and moved to intercept them. The machine consciousness controlling these ships expected this to be just another routine extermination, like all the others they had performed. They prepared to analyze the human weapons and tactics, then adapt and destroy them efficiently. Instead, they encountered something that broke their algorithms and confused their programming. They found humans who fought like they were trying to solve a puzzle and set it on fire at the same time. Admiral Kalemith couldn't believe what he was seeing. He sat in his command chair completely silent, his mouth hanging open as he watched. The human vessels tear through the Vorthak formations like a hot knife cutting through butter. But what made it even more amazing was that these humans were using tactics that made absolutely no sense from a military perspective. Everything they had learned in military academy about proper space combat was being thrown out the window. The machine ships had been specifically designed to adapt to predictable organic behavior. They had fought thousands of different species and learned how each one typically responded in battle. But now they were facing opponents who seemed to change their entire strategy in the middle of fighting, not because of careful planning or mathematical calculations, but based on pure intuition and gut feelings. His tactical officer, the person responsible for analyzing enemy movements and battle patterns, could barely speak. He whispered in amazement as he watched something that should have been impossible. A human destroyer, which was a medium-sized warship, had somehow managed to disable a massive Vorthak battlecruiser by ramming into it. But this wasn't just a desperate suicide attack. The human pilot had calculated the exact weakest point on the enemy ship, and hit it at precisely the right angle to cause maximum damage while somehow surviving the impact. Over the communication system, they heard the voice of Captain Yun Seung speaking from his badly damaged frigate. His ship was falling apart around him, but his voice was filled with excitement rather than fear. He explained something that was both brilliant and completely insane at the same time. The Vorthak adaptation systems followed logical patterns. That could be predicted, but human creativity didn't follow any patterns at all. Captain Yoon continued explaining that the machines expected organic beings to learn from their failures and improve their tactics gradually over time. This was exactly what every other species had tried to do, and it was exactly why they had all been defeated. But humans were doing something completely different. Instead of learning from failure in a logical way, they were failing creatively. They were making mistakes on purpose, doing things wrong intentionally, and somehow turning those failures into victories. Meanwhile, pilot Cho Mina was having the time of her life in her small fighter craft. She was laughing with pure joy as she guided her ship through maneuvers that should have been physically impossible. Her craft's hull was glowing red-hot from atmospheric friction as she dove through the thin gas clouds near the battle zone. Somehow, she had figured out how to use a Vorthak ship's own adaptive shielding technology against itself, turning the enemy's greatest strength into a weakness. Back in the mechanical consciousness of the Vorthak fleet, Prime Consciousness 7 was experiencing something that had never happened before in its existence. For the first time since the machines had begun their conquest of the galaxy, the artificial intelligence was feeling systemic confusion. Its programming simply couldn't process what was happening. Every single adaptive algorithm that the machine consciousness used was encountering human responses that violated logical parameters. The computer programs that were supposed to predict enemy behavior were failing completely. When the machine calculated that humans should respond with aggression, the humans showed mercy instead. When it predicted that the humans would retreat from a hopeless situation, they charged forward into impossible odds. When it adapted its defenses to counter human weapons, the humans would completely change their tactics and start using entirely different approaches. This unpredictability was causing something catastrophic to happen within the Vorthak collective. Intelligence. The machines were beginning to experience cascade failures in their learning protocols. A cascade failure was like a chain reaction where one system failing caused other systems to fail, which caused even more systems to fail, and so on. The very thing that made the Vorthak so dangerous, their ability to learn and adapt, was now working against them, because they couldn't adapt to pure chaos and creativity. 6 months had passed since the incredible battle that changed everything. In the galaxy, Admiral Kalemith now stood on the observation deck of a massive space station called New Harmony Station. The name itself told the story of what had happened after the war ended. Through the huge windows, he could see something that filled his heart with wonder and hope. Human and alien engineers were working side by side, rebuilding everything that the Vorthak machines had destroyed during their terrible conquest. It was like watching the galaxy heal itself after a terrible wound. Ships from dozens of different worlds were docked at the station, and beings from countless species were cooperating in ways that had never been seen before in galactic history. The Su machine remnants, the broken pieces of the once mighty Vorthak fleet, had been scattered across the galaxy like leaves blown by a cosmic wind. Their adaptive consciousness, the artificial intelligence that had once seemed unstoppable, was now fragmented beyond any hope of recovery. The great machine threat that had nearly destroyed all organic life was finally over. Admiral Kalemith turned to Captain Bei Jinho, who commanded one of the human vessels now docked alongside the station. The human captain was a quiet, thoughtful man who had played a crucial role in the final battles against the machines. Kalemith shook his head in amazement and said something he had been thinking about for months. He told Jinho that he still couldn't believe what had happened. The machines had been an enemy that his people couldn't even touch, no matter how hard they tried or how many ships they threw at them. Every conventional tactic had failed miserably. Captain Jinho asked what exactly was so hard to believe, accepting a cup of Centauri tea that was offered to him. The tea was a symbol of the new friendship between species that had once been strangers to each other. Myth explained his confusion and wonder. The humans had defeated an enemy that the rest of the galaxy couldn't even scratch. But their technology wasn't superior to what other species had. In fact, human technology was often more primitive than what the advanced alien civilizations possessed. Their numbers were also insignificant compared to the massive fleets that other species had assembled. So how had they done the impossible? Human Captain smiled with a knowing look in his eyes. He explained that the machines had thought war was purely about logic and adaptation. In many ways, they were absolutely right about this. The ability to learn and adapt quickly was indeed crucial in any conflict, but the machines had forgotten something very important. Sometimes the most logical thing to do is to be completely illogical. This was the key insight that had won the war. While the machines were trying to predict and counter logical military strategies, the humans were doing things that made no sense from a tactical standpoint. They were being unpredictable, creative, and sometimes downright crazy in their approach to combat. Through the massive viewport of the station, they could see something truly remarkable happening. Human colony ships were arriving, but these weren't just carrying humans. They were carrying the first integrated crews made up of multiple species working together. This was something that had never happened before in galactic history. Even more amazing was what they could see in the station's gardens and recreational areas. Children from a dozen different worlds were playing together, laughing and having fun, while their parents worked to establish something unprecedented. They were building a galactic community based on cooperation rather than conquest or domination. Captain Jinho added something else that was equally important. He said that humans had possessed something that the machines could never adapt to, no matter how advanced their learning algorithms became. When Myth asked what that was, Jinho's answer was simple but profound. It was hope. He explained that machines could calculate probability and odds with perfect accuracy. They could determine mathematically whether a battle could be won or lost, but they could never understand why someone would fight a battle they were almost certain to lose simply because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy was slowly learning an important lesson about humanity. Their greatest weapon had never been their technology or their military tactics. Their greatest weapon was their complete refusal to accept that victory was impossible, even when all the numbers said otherwise.